The neighborhood used to remember that summer as unbearably quiet. Not because of heat. Not because people stayed indoors. But because one sound never came back. The soft rattle of a child's bike chain. The uneven rhythm of training wheels wobbling against cracked pavement. The laugh that usually followed when the bike tilted too far left, then right, then somehow stayed upright. That sound disappeared on a Sunday afternoon, and with it, a 5-year-old boy named Evan Miller. 10 years later, the truth would begin to surface beneath a concrete floor. But on the day Evan vanished, no one had any reason to believe the ground itself was hiding a secret. June 14, 2014. A day so ordinary that nothing about it seemed worth remembering, until everything about it became impossible to forget. Evan Miller lived with his mother, Rachel, in a modest single-story house on the edge of a quiet suburban block. The houses were close together, the lawns trimmed just enough to show pride but not perfection. Kids played freely here. Doors were rarely locked during the day. Evan was 5 years old, 6 in a few months. Small for his age. Pale skin that burned easily in the sun. Hair the color of dry wheat. Eyes always scanning, always curious. That afternoon, Evan begged to ride his bike. It was a bright blue bicycle, a little too big for him, but that never stopped Evan from insisting it was fast. The paint was chipped along the frame. One of the training wheels sat slightly higher than the other, causing the bike to rock side to side. Rachel hesitated, like she always did. He was still young. The world still felt too big. But Evan knew the neighborhood. He always stayed close. Just the sidewalk loop. Just 10 minutes. "Don't go past the corner," she told him, crouching down to zip his hoodie. "I won't," Evan promised. She watched him pedal away. She would later replay that moment thousands of times, searching for something she missed. A stranger watching from a window. A car slowing down. A feeling in her chest telling her to stop him. There was nothing. Just a little boy riding his bike into a quiet afternoon. At first, Rachel wasn't worried. Evan had a habit of stopping to look at ants, cracks in the sidewalk, anything remotely interesting. 10 minutes easily became 15. But 30 minutes passed. Then 45. Rachel stepped outside and scanned the street. No blue bike. She walked to the corner Evan was never supposed to pass. Looked left. Looked right. Nothing. Her heart started beating faster, but she told herself to stay calm. Kids wandered. Kids got distracted. Someone had probably invited Evan inside to play. She knocked on doors. One neighbor hadn't seen him. Another said they thought they heard a bike earlier but weren't sure. A third said they saw a child riding, but couldn't describe him. By the time Rachel called 911, it had been nearly 2 hours. Her voice shook as she described Evan. His age. His clothes. His bike. The dispatcher asked questions that felt too heavy, too sudden. "What time did you last see him? Does he know your phone number? Has he ever wandered off before?" Police cars arrived quickly. Then more. Officers walked the streets, checking yards, sheds, garages. Someone suggested he might have fallen into a drainage ditch. Another suggested he'd wandered farther than anyone realized. But one detail disturbed everyone. The blue bike was nowhere to be found. By nightfall, the search expanded. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters circled overhead. Volunteers formed lines, walking through wooded patches and empty lots. Rachel stayed near the command post, clutching Evan's spare hoodie like it was a lifeline. The scent dogs picked up Evan's trail briefly, then lost it near a side street that led toward older homes. It was as if Evan had vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks. Posters covered telephone poles. Rachel appeared on local news, begging for help. Tips flooded in, sightings that led nowhere, rumors that dissolved under scrutiny. Police explored every possibility. Abduction, accident, runaway, though everyone quietly knew how impossible that sounded for a 5-year-old. There were no witnesses, no surveillance footage, no physical evidence, no bike. Eventually, the case slowed, then stalled, and finally, it went quiet. There was one person who lived close to the corner where Evan's scent disappeared. A man named Thomas Grady, in his late 50s. Quiet, kept to himself. Known mostly as the man who looked after houses for absentee owners. A caretaker of sorts, fixing leaks, mowing lawns, watching properties while families were away. He lived alone in one of the older homes on the block. Police spoke to him briefly during the initial canvass. He said he'd been inside most of the day. Didn't hear anything unusual. Didn't see Evan. There was no reason to push further. At the time, no one was suspicious of anyone. The neighborhood believed what it wanted to believe, that Evan had wandered off or been taken by someone passing through. Something easier than imagining the truth was close. Too close. Years passed. Rachel moved out of the neighborhood. She couldn't stand the silence where Evan's laughter used to be. She kept his room untouched for years, then finally packed it away piece by piece. The blue bike haunted her dreams. She imagined it rusting somewhere. Hidden. Waiting. The case was officially labeled inactive, though never closed. And then, 10 years later, something unexpected happened. The old Grady property had changed hands. New owners planned a full renovation, tearing up floors, updating plumbing, modernizing everything. On a Tuesday morning, construction workers began breaking through the concrete slab beneath the living room. The jackhammer struck something solid. Not rebar. Not stone. Metal. One of the workers knelt down, brushing away dust. Blue paint peeked through the gray. A curved frame. A wheel. The room went silent. They all knew what they were looking at before anyone said it out loud. A child's bicycle. Detective Mark Holloway was the one who made the call. 10 years older. 10 years heavier with unresolved cases. He stared at the photos sent from the renovation site. The chipped blue paint. The uneven training wheels. He recognized it immediately. That afternoon, he dialed Rachel Miller's number, one she never changed. When she answered, he didn't ease into it. "Rachel," he said quietly, "we found something." Her knees gave out before he even finished the sentence. The discovery beneath that house would shatter a decade of assumptions. But the bike was only the beginning. Because if Evan's bicycle had been hidden there all along, then someone didn't just see him disappear. Someone was involved. The house had been silent for years. Dust gathered in corners. The walls held the faint outline of old furniture long since removed. What once felt ordinary now felt heavy, especially after what had been pulled from beneath its floor. The blue bicycle sat in an evidence tent, half buried in dirt and concrete residue. Rust clung to the chain. One training wheel was bent inward, frozen in the same crooked angle it had been the day Evan Miller vanished. Detective Mark Holloway stood with his hands on his hips, staring at it. He'd worked dozens of cold cases. But this one felt different. Because this wasn't just evidence. It was time, sealed underground and waiting to be uncovered. Rachel Miller arrived at the station an hour after the call. She hadn't cried yet. Shock had taken over, wrapping her thoughts in cotton. She sat stiffly across from Holloway as photos were laid out in front of her, each one more painful than the last. The blue bike. Her hands trembled as she reached forward. "That's his," she whispered. There was no question. No doubt. She traced the chipped paint with her finger on the glossy photo. The same spot Evan had scraped when he fell learning to ride. The sticker she let him put on the frame, now barely visible. Holloway watched her carefully. This wasn't closure. This was reopening a wound that never healed. "We don't know everything yet," he said gently. "But this changes the case." Rachel looked up, eyes hollow. "You're saying someone hid it?" Holloway didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. Forensic teams combed the property inch by inch. The concrete slab had been poured years earlier. Records showed the work was done shortly after Evan disappeared. The timing was impossible to ignore. Beneath the bike, investigators found disturbed soil. Not deep, but deliberate. The house itself began to tell a story. Inside the walls, they discovered repairs that hadn't been documented. A section of drywall that had been replaced hastily. Newer insulation in places that didn't make sense. Someone had been hiding something. Or several things. But the most unsettling discovery came from the foundation. Traces of organic material. Not enough to identify. Not enough, yet. But enough to confirm one thing. This wasn't just about a bike. The case file was pulled from storage. Boxes labeled Miller, Evan, Missing Juvenile were reopened. Dust blown off. Old notes reread. Every lead. Every tip. Every interview. And one name kept appearing in the margins. Thomas Grady. The quiet caretaker. The man who lived in that house for nearly 20 years. The man police spoke to once, and never again. Holloway felt a cold weight settle in his chest. At the time, Grady had been cooperative. Polite. Forgettable. Too forgettable. Investigators began rebuilding Grady's life from the ground up. Born out of state. Moved frequently. Never married. No children. He made his living as a caretaker, watching properties, fixing things, staying behind the scenes. He had access to dozens of homes over the years. No criminal record. No obvious red flags. But something stood out. Grady had volunteered at community events involving children, cleanup days, local fairs, neighborhood barbecues. Always helpful. Always present. Always unnoticed. Neighbors described him the same way. Quiet. Harmless. A little strange, maybe. No one remembered him owning a bike. No one remembered seeing Evan near his house. But memory is a fragile thing, especially 10 years later. Holloway focused on the day Evan disappeared. Grady claimed he was inside most of the afternoon. But phone records told a different story. Grady's cell phone, rarely used, pinged off a tower closer to the side street where Evan's scent disappeared. He'd made a short call around the exact time Evan was last seen. To whom, investigators couldn't tell. The number was prepaid. Disposable. The kind you don't use unless you don't want to be traced. That call lasted 42 seconds. Long enough to say just enough. Detectives returned to the old neighborhood. This time, they asked different questions. Had anyone seen Evan talk to an adult that day? Had anyone noticed Grady outside his house? A woman 2 doors down hesitated. She remembered something. A child's bike near Grady's driveway. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. Kids rode everywhere. Another neighbor recalled seeing Grady hosing down his driveway later that evening. That memory had been dismissed as routine. Now it felt wrong. Every overlooked detail stacked higher. Every probably nothing turned into something else entirely. There was one problem. Thomas Grady was gone. He'd moved out of the state 3 years earlier, quietly, without fanfare. No forwarding address. No social media. No close family. It was like he'd faded away. But he'd left something behind. The house. And beneath it, the truth. Rachel struggled as the investigation reignited. The media returned. Cameras camped outside her home. Headlines resurfaced Evan's face, a little older now, aged digitally to show what he might have looked like at 15. She couldn't look. Every interview reopened the same question. How close had Evan been when she lost him? How close had the danger always been? Detectives informed her that a suspect was emerging. Not officially named, but focused. Rachel felt a strange mix of relief and terror. Because answers meant something else too. They meant Evan hadn't wandered away. He hadn't been lost. He had been taken. A warrant was issued to search Grady's storage unit, something no one knew existed until bank records surfaced. Inside, investigators found boxes, tools, old photographs, and one item that made everyone stop breathing. A child's helmet, blue, cracked along the side. Rachel identified it immediately. Evan had stopped wearing it the week before he disappeared. He said it was uncomfortable. She never found it again. Now, investigators had proof that Evan's belongings were scattered, not lost. Hidden. Collected. And the man responsible had years to disappear. But Holloway believed something else. You don't bury evidence beneath your own house unless you think you'll never be caught. Thomas Grady was found 3 states away, living under a different name, working another quiet job, blending into another neighborhood that had no idea who, or what, he really was. When Detective Mark Holloway stepped into the small interrogation room where Grady waited, he felt the weight of 10 years settle into the air between them. This wasn't just an interview. This was a reckoning. Thomas Grady looked older than his years. His hair had thinned to gray strands. His shoulders slumped forward, like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. He didn't look nervous when Holloway entered. He looked tired. "You know why you're here," Holloway said, taking a seat. Grady nodded slowly. "I figured this day would come," he replied. That single sentence told Holloway everything. Innocent men didn't talk like that. At first, Grady denied harming Evan. He said the boy wandered into his yard. Said he fell. Said he panicked. But the details didn't line up. The buried bicycle. The poured concrete. The hidden helmet. These weren't the actions of a man who made a mistake. These were the actions of someone who planned to erase a child. When Holloway laid the photos on the table, the bike beneath the floor, the helmet from the storage unit, Grady's eyes lingered too long. "You didn't just see Evan that day," Holloway said. "You took him." Grady swallowed hard. The silence stretched. Then, quietly, he began to talk. According to Grady, Evan had been riding too fast down the side street. Grady was outside, watching. He had spoken to Evan before. Small conversations. Harmless, he claimed. Compliments about the bike. Questions about where he lived. That day, he offered Evan water. Evan followed him into the house. What happened next unraveled slowly, piece by piece, as Grady spoke in a flat, emotionless tone. An accident, he said. A fall. A moment he couldn't undo. But what he did afterward told the real story. Instead of calling for help, instead of calling 911, Grady hid the evidence. He buried the bike first, then poured concrete. He believed time would do the rest. For 10 years, Grady lived above that floor. He walked across it daily, sat above it, slept above it. The house became a tomb, not just for evidence, but for the truth. Neighbors waved to him. Children played nearby. Life went on, and no one knew what lay beneath their feet. Rachel Miller was informed before the press. She sat in the same room where Evan once played with toy cars, now an adult woman forced to listen to the final chapter of her son's life. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She asked one question. Was he scared? Detective Holloway couldn't answer. Some questions don't have answers that bring peace. Only truth. Thomas Grady was charged. The case that once went cold now dominated headlines. Missing boy case solved after 10 years. Renovation reveals dark secret beneath home. But justice felt incomplete, because nothing could give Rachel back the sound of a blue bicycle rolling down the street. Nothing could return the boy who never made it home. A memorial appeared at the corner where Evan vanished. Blue ribbons. Small bicycles. Candles lit at night. Parents watched their children more closely. Doors locked sooner. The neighborhood would never feel the same again. Concrete had hidden the evidence. Silence had hidden the crime. But truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of surfacing. Evan Miller didn't disappear. He was taken. And 10 years later, a house renovation finally told the truth. If stories like Evan's matter to you, if you believe the forgotten deserve to be remembered, subscribe to the channel for more in-depth true crime investigations. Like this video to help keep these stories alive. Comment your thoughts below. What moment stood out to you most? And share this video so more people hear Evan's story. Because some truths are buried, but they should never stay hidden.